Hey guys, Joey here today. Welcome to another video. Today guys, we will be building your very own portable Taser. Now this is actually running off of a 9-volt battery, and I think this is a pretty cool project. So without further ado, I want to get into it, but I first want to go over the fact that you're doing this at your own risk. I'm not responsible for anything that you do to others or to yourself. So keep that in mind, and be careful building this. Anyway, thank you guys, and let's get right into the build. Alright guys, the first step of this build is taking the boost converter and stripping it of its outer layer. What a boost converter does is takes a voltage and boosts it. Big surprise. This module advertises a boost up to 400,000 volts. I'm not sure if this is accurate. This could be an example of something that can only be reached at absolutely perfect conditions. However, that is a hefty voltage and very important if you want to have a spark gap. Now you have to keep in mind that 400,000 volts, I doubt we will actually reach 400,000 volts. However, if we are actually reaching 400,000 volts, that is absolutely massive, seeing that commercial tasers that you can buy off the street are only roughly 20 to 30 to 40,000 at the most in terms of voltage. On the module, you'll see a green and red cable, red of course corresponding with a positive connector and green with a negative connector. On the other end of the module, you'll see two high voltage out cables that are the same exact color. At this point, I had found that some components of the module were extruding out of the protective plastic shell, and this is because, of course, I took away the shell to limit the space that this module would take up in the final product. However, I just simply decided that I would cover these components with hot glue just to make sure that they were properly insulated, seeing that some of the components were metal and I didn't want to risk any sort of problem. At this point, I decided to test the module. I did this by using helping hands to hold the two high voltage outputs close together. I then took the positive and negative inputs on the other side of the module and hooked it up to a 9-volt battery. As you can see, this is a working module. The next step is to take the negative lead and shorten it using scissors. I then strip the end of the cable and prepare my solder to solder this ground connector to the ground of the 9-volt battery. I now hung up the module using my helping hands, and guys, don't forget to wear some sort of eye protection to protect against spattering. After all, solder is very hot and can spatter quite easily. Also, don't forget to use some sort of venting system if you're not outside, because solder is after all made of lead, which can be very harmful to your lungs. For me, I know for a fact that it causes me to have a lot of lung problems on top of my asthma, which is very frustrating and takes days to go away, and that's only after soldering a couple times without having some sort of extraction method. So I use this fan, which I'll have a link to on eBay. I solder these two leads together by filling the ground lead on the 9-volt battery with solder, so it would make it easier to solder the wire to that battery. I then tested the module again to make sure that the solder is making a solid connection to both the battery as well as the wire. Next, I took a short bit of red wiring, soldered one end to the positive side of the 9-volt battery and the other end to a momentary switch. The other side of the momentary switch I soldered to the positive side of the module, so then we have a complete circuit. As you can see, this would be the final product of the last step. We have the 9-volt battery hooked up to a red wire, which leads to a momentary switch, which then leads to the positive connector of the module, and then we have the ground of the battery hooked up to the ground of the module. At the other side of the module, you'll see that we have our two high voltage outputs that remain unchanged. I then hot glued all these components hard to the module so then they wouldn't be moving around, as they seem to be quite loose, as you can see. I shortened and then stripped the wires of the high voltage outputs, and then I covered them with solder to easily attach them to the two Taser leads. Now I heated the solder to liquid temperature using my soldering iron, and then using some clippers I held two pieces of metal inside the solder until the solder had solid. Now remember, these pieces of metals will heat to extremely high temperatures, so you cannot hold it in by your hand, just something to keep in mind. Also, I used two pieces of metal that I salvaged from a wall adapter. Now you can use basically any piece of metal. You could use a screw, a nail, a paper clip. All these things will work. All you have to do is make sure that they have a close enough spark gap so it does not blow out the boost converter. Now I decided to test our device once again, and as you can see, it works, but not quite right. As you see, it's making the spark gap at the very base of the module, where it's not actually at the end of the pieces of metal. So what we're going to need to do is cover that with hot glue. Now I actually go through a very lengthy process where I completely cover this thing in hot glue and put an absolute shit ton on there, making sure to cover both the sides as well, make sure there's nothing peeking through, because I don't want to accidentally hit myself. I'm not sure how exactly I would do that, seeing that I'm never planning on touching that little bit there. However, it's best to be safe rather than sorry. The Taser is basically complete in terms of functionality. All that remains is to wrap an electrical tape. I decided to wrap an electrical tape, seeing that there could be gaps inside the hot glue that could cause a spark to hit you as the holder, as well as the fact that this battery is very ugly. Okay guys, that's how you build your very own portable taser. Now don't forget, you're doing this project at your own risk. I'm not responsible for anything you do to yourself or to others, so keep that in mind. And thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you liked the video. Bye!